Support this podcast at patreon.com/Kris Karl Photography Podcast. The way that we always start these, the most important thing that we have to do is lay the groundwork and find out why it is that you picked up a camera for the first time. So do you remember exactly what it was that made you want to become a photographer at all?
Well, I originally got into it because my dad was a photographer and he taught photography for a long time. And I was probably like in between 9, 10, the age of 9 or 10, I'd imagine. Where my dad, he'd just kind of be going out shooting photos and he had an extra camera and, just kind of offered if, asked me if I wanted to come out and just kind of mess around and take photos with him. And I was pretty young to really understand the magnitude of what photography can do. But I just remember having a lot of fun, spending time with my dad, going out and shooting pictures and whatnot. And, shortly after that, I got more into the video side of things. But that's what initially sparked my interest just with cameras and the art or the medium of photography and filmmaking and just, being able to capture a moment in time and then go back and revisit those memories in the future. I immediately was drawn to that and just found it to be extremely intriguing. And then I just kind of ran with the video stuff for a while. Through high school, I kind of dropped I didn't necessarily lose my interest in photography, but was just 90% of what I was doing was video, just for fun, just filming the adventures my friends and I would go on. And then recently, about a year and a half ago, March of 2019 is when my dad actually gifted me a film camera. And that is what reignited my love for still photography and particularly film photography. And then the last year and a half, it's been the roles have kind of reversed and I've gone back to just really focusing on still photography and then being able to make videos on YouTube about that medium has been an absolute blast.
Well, what seems to be quite interesting at the moment is that, maybe for about 3 years, there's been sort of a universal movement to bring back film photography in some way or another. And it seems to be lots and lots of individuals that are sort of finding film photography. And there has to be some kind of mitigating factor between all these people, despite their geography and their circumstances. They're all finding their way back to it. What was it about being given that film camera that made you suddenly fall back in love with it?
I've been thinking about that recently and it's hard to pinpoint exactly one specific thing, but when my dad showed me the camera, I didn't even know it was for me. He just picked it up and I was like, oh man, are you going to start shooting photography again? I didn't even really know about film photography. I knew, film existed obviously and motion picture film and all that, but I didn't really understand what film photography was at the time. I strictly shot on digital my entire life. So to see this film camera and to, have them kind of explain exactly what film was and why it was special, it drew me in initially. And then I remember the first time I shot on it, that is what initially sparked, I think, my long-term love for film because, I took it to the local camera store where my dad purchased it and kind of had them run through how to use it and kind of what the whole process was like. And so I went out and shot with it for the first time. And I just remember it being, very barbaric compared to digital photography, which actually interested me a lot because, it's that it was the first time I'd ever, shot an image and not been able to look at it right away. And it was the first time that I had to really think about my metering and understand how light worked in a frame. And it just slowed my entire process down to a point that I was extremely unfamiliar with. shooting on digital for so long. And I got that first roll back and I actually kind of messed up. I got a couple blank shots in there, but I just remember getting those scans back after a week. It was like a week after I had shot that roll. I got my pictures back and I was just immediately blown away by, that kind of natural feeling that film has, the color rendition and, all of the kind of basic things that people love about film, the grain, the dynamic range and the highlight roll off and all that. But, for me, I think it was more the process that initially got me really intrigued. Just that slow, very methodical, shooting process. It was something that I was unfamiliar with, and it was a really nice change of pace, especially for where I was at that point in my life, just in college where everything's so rapid and instant. To have this medium that like really helped me take a step back and also enjoy the things that I was shooting. Cause so often I'd shoot video and I'd solely rely on the video to, spark memories about that moment. But with film, it's like you take it in as a person as well. So it's like you're feeding your own memory bank as well as having a lot of images to look back on.
If you excuse me for asking such a painfully broad question at this point, but if you've done video work and you've done digital stills work and you've done film stills work, do you feel like you're the same? Are you the same person with each of those mediums, or do you feel like you put on a different hat, so to speak, depending on what you're actually working with?
I feel like I've always been like the same person, no matter what medium I'm shooting. When I was really focusing on my video work, the direction I was planning on going was kind of like YouTube, vlogging, Casey Neistat kind of style stuff. And yeah, it was just at a really like immature stage of my life. So I think during that time where I was trying to run with, this YouTube film, kind of making videos every day kind of thing, I think that it was a very different version of who I am now. And film photography, I think, has actually helped me mature as an artist, just because of the process and because of how intentional you have to be with what you're shooting. And, just that idea that every shot does kind of come with a dollar amount attached to it and you have a limited amount of shots. I think that totally changed my perspective on really any sort of photography or even video. I noticed that it kind of changed the way I shoot my videos as well, just really slowing things down and thinking about the shot that I'm composing on the video side of things, which is something that I just would never do, especially, as if you're doing like YouTube video stuff, it's kind of just run and gun, like capture whatever you want. But through shooting film, I've also taken a lot of the traits that I've developed through film photography and applied it to my video work. And it's been really nice. But yeah, I'd say, I've always, it does, like, depending on which format I'm shooting, it doesn't really change who I am. Definitely obviously changes how I shoot, but I think I've kind of found my home with film photography. And then I love making because I still love video and filmmaking. So being able to use that skill and make videos about film photography, I think I've finally kind of found my niche and my home.
Well, it's interesting because like in terms of linear time, it was film that then morphed into digital as the technology progressed. But what we're seeing, as with yourself, myself, and I think a lot of other people, they actually started off digital. They started off with that instant gratification, that ability to instantly check back on the work that they're doing. Yeah. And then they've moved towards film. And I think one of the common misconceptions with something like film compared to digital is that it's an old, outdated technology, as opposed to the way that I sort of see it, which is like it's comparing electric guitars to acoustic guitars. Just because you have an electric guitar doesn't mean there isn't a place for where an acoustic guitar would actually be a more useful tool for the job.
Absolutely.
Do you think that you would be different if you'd have sort of began learning on film? Do you think you'd be a different photographer at this point if you'd have gone from film to digital as opposed to digital to film?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because if I had started with film, which I think is uncommon for people my age. Like you said, I think most of us kind of started with digital and transition. The current film photographers, maybe they started with digital and they've kind of over the last couple of years found the medium of film. Yeah, I think had I started with film, which would have been possible, especially with my dad being a photographer. He shot a lot of film back in the day, but he was kind of one of those people that was drawn into that initial excitement of the digital cameras. And when he was teaching, he taught a lot of film photography, and then kind of right in the middle of that, he was like digital was completely introduced to the world of photography. And so he transitioned all of his teaching material and in the classroom environment to shooting on digital, which is kind of funny. But I think it's even possible that the roles would be reversed. Maybe I had been shooting on film for 6 or 7 years, and I might have found the change to digital to be a nice change of pace. I'm just somebody in general who always likes change, whether it's the place that I'm living or what I'm doing for work. I have a hard time sitting in one location for a long period of time. And I think that transitions over to, my art and what I'm shooting. So it's definitely possible that had I been shooting on film for 6 or 7 years, just switching over to digital and having more, just not having to worry about limited number of shots and actually being able to see my images right afterwards, right after I take it, and make adjustments on the fly. Perhaps I would have found that to be a very nice change of pace. And I recently had an experience just last week where I was out shooting nighttime photography, and I was shooting I shot a good amount on my digital camera at night. And honestly, it was a much easier experience than shooting on my film camera, just because you can bump the ISO up to 3200, 6400 and still get usable images. And you can see the photo right afterwards and make these critical adjustments that you wouldn't be able to make on film. So I found myself really realizing, wow, digital is a very valuable tool still. It's just, making sure you pick out the right tool for the job. And 95% of what I do now, as far as still photography goes, it seems as though, shooting on film is the correct tool for me, just with the process and the actual final image that I get. I think film does have a look to it that is very, very difficult to replicate on digital. And it's just something that I really enjoy. But I've, like last week, like I mentioned, I was like, wow, shooting digital at night, this is highly beneficial, and kind of made me want to invest in a nicer digital camera, just for those specific applications. So I think it really depends, but I think going back to your original question, I think it would have been perhaps roles reversed, and just switching over to digital would have been a nice way to change up my style of photography, and maybe it would have made me a little bit more creative, just like film has made me much more creative after I jumped into it last year.
Well, to go back to what you were saying there about not wanting to stay still for too long, mm-hmm. I've noticed, obviously, looking at your Instagram and just generally knowing about your work, there's a lot of work from, Norway, Ireland, and different parts of the United States. We've mentioned before this started that you've been to London, which I have my condolences for you for. Do you use, my original question was going to be, do you travel to shoot, or do you shoot while you're traveling? In other words, which one kind of leads the other? But I feel like you've kind of already answered that. I guess the question is, would you still be traveling as much if you weren't a photographer? Would that itch to move be there as much if you weren't documenting it at the same time?
That's a really great question. And that's an interesting one. I think I definitely would be traveling just as much. I think I would be, because, I've always been intrigued by traveling. My parents, they moved to Norway for 3 years, and during the summers they'd travel all over Europe. Like, it's just wired in my DNA, I think. But having, like, I struggle with not being able to go anywhere without having photography in the back of my head. You know, whenever I travel, it's like, I tend to go places, and then like, the idea of shooting somewhere doesn't have like super heavily inspire me, or it doesn't affect where I go particularly. But I think oh man, it's so tough. I think I would just be traveling a little bit. Yeah, I know. Well, I think, okay, let me start fresh here. So I have definitely gone on trips specifically for photography, 100%. I absolutely love traveling though. And I would love to be able to just go places and not bring my camera. I was recently talking to a friend, and he was like, yeah, I got this buddy who kind of got the same issue as you, because when I'll be driving down the road and I'll like see something and I can't pull my camera out, and then I get super stressed about it. I'm like, oh my God. So that just happens to me all the time. So it'd be nice to be able to really divide the two and be like, okay, I'm going on this trip specifically to shoot photos, or I'm going on this trip specifically to just enjoy traveling and all the joys that come with traveling. I think traveling is a really special thing when combined with photography, because it enables you to capture something extremely unfamiliar to you. Something that I think about a lot is if somebody came to my hometown, they would probably see things that I wouldn't even think about shooting because it's just so familiar to me. So I think a lot of my best work comes when I'm traveling, because it's such an unfamiliar sight for my eyes, and I see things with a completely open mind. Whereas if I shoot my hometown, it's things that I've seen for 20 years of my life, and they've just become extremely normalized. Whereas, if you came to my hometown, I think you would see things in a completely new light. Mm-hmm. That's one of the biggest motivators to travel as far as the photography side of things go, is just, if like last summer I did a trip, went to 10 or 11 countries in Europe. And of course, the whole time I was looking to make photos, but the places that we decided to go, my friends and I decided to go, like I didn't specifically choose those places because I was like, I really want to photograph this specific place or this specific landscape in this country. It was like, I really want to travel and see the culture there and see what that country has to offer. And while I'm there, I'm going to have a camera and be documenting it. Norway is one of those. I think if I could shoot one country for the rest of my life, it would be Norway, just because the landscape is so diverse and it's such an amazing country. And I went there 2 years, the previous 2 years, before my trip last summer as well. So I'd been there 3 years in a row, and the 2 years I went prior, I wasn't even into film or really still photography at all. So I saw a lot of landscapes on those 2 trips that I'd love to go back and capture on film. But yeah, I'm working towards being able to separate the two more. But overall, I think I love traveling, and I'll go to places. There's places that I want to go that I haven't been yet. Southeast Asia, and that just kind of initially draws me in. And then of course I'm going to have my camera with me to document whatever I find. But I find myself rarely going somewhere with the intention of like, okay, I really want to shoot this specific thing that I saw on the internet or something like that. It's like, I'm going to go somewhere, see what I see, and then have my camera ready to document that.
So it's more a case of kind of breadcrumbs. Your photos are kind of just showing people, or showing even for yourself, as a good trace of everywhere that you've been. One of the things I think people get quite wrong with photography in general, and obviously this is entirely an opinion, but because it's mine, I think it's 100% correct, is that people don't actually experience the things that they're photographing. Mm-hmm. A lot of the time they photograph them, and then they kind of only absorb them when they look back at the photographs. They were never really in the moment. And I think like a good cultural example of that is if you've been to like any music festival or gig. I was just
going to say that.
Yeah. So nobody is actually watching it. Everybody's too busy recording it so they can watch it later with terrible audio quality and terrible visual quality.
And make sure everybody knows that they're having a fun time,
And culturally, we all know that you're not having a fun time because your arm hurts because you're just holding your phone up in the air and you're not even paying attention to what you're doing. It's one of the funny things with cameras in general is the more and more cameras that we seem to have, the less and less in the moment we seem to be.
Yep.
How much of your traveling is research based in the sense of do you dive into the culture of where you are and like go beyond the tourist attractions to find the photos that you want and to find in general the experience that you want? Or are you someone that just kind of goes where you're led to?
So recently, like last year's trip, it really depends on if I'm like with my friends or just by myself. I went to 2 years ago, I did a trip to Europe completely by myself. And that was a really fun experience because I found myself interacting with people that I'd meet in the hostel and really relying on, the local culture and local community to recommend places to go, recommend me places to go. So that was a lot of fun because I met this kid from South Korea who was just traveling alone by himself, and he didn't speak a lot of English, but we ended up spending an entire day together on riding a train in Switzerland, a couple local towns, and walking around, shooting pictures together. And he had to use a translator app so that we could communicate a lot of the time. But it was such a natural and organic experience, which was something that was super cool for me, just because previously it had been a lot of just relying on Google and searching cool places in Switzerland to, travel to and see and whatnot. So that was a real eye opener for me, just how much better experiences can be if you set your phone down and just kind of go to a place,
right,
and ask somebody on the street, hey, what's something cool to do here? Because 9 out of 10 times they're gonna know better than Google, because like you said, when you just look up a place, or top 10 sites to see in Austria or Switzerland, it's just going to give you the touristy basic landmarks that everybody goes to. And chances are, if you're going there to shoot photos, it's a photo that's been shot 1,000 times. And
yep,
by interacting with the locals and engaging in like really being vulnerable and letting yourself kind of dive into a country's culture, I think it gives you such a unique experience compared to just being on the internet, having your head down the entire time and not talking to the people in the city that you're at. So yeah, I think that's something that I want to show in my photography moving forward, especially as I mature as a person, just not only photographing really, this is a really cool looking landscape and it's really dramatic, but how can I capture the culture of the place that I'm in? How can I tell the story of the people that live there? Because I think that's one of the most fascinating things, just on a human level, is
right.
We tend to get trapped in a little bubble. I specifically have just my hometown where I grew up. I think I become so accustomed to the way we do things that I just think this is right and this is normal. And then I go to a place, some small town in Germany, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is just, it totally opens your mind to new ways of living, to new beliefs. And I think that's one of the best ways to grow as a human being. So, through traveling and photography, I've definitely seen how beneficial it can be to just, when you're out at these locations, like put your phone down, have your film camera on you, because like I mentioned earlier, I think if having a film camera is a great way to balance being in the moment and being present, but also documenting it to look back on later. So yeah, I think I've kind of found a really good fusion between traveling, photography, and experiencing the cultures of these places that I go by having a film camera, setting my phone down, and, trying to engage as much with the local people as I possibly can.
I've been saying for a while that I think we're about a decade off of realizing the serious mental damage that having a phone on you all the time is actually doing, especially to younger people. But to move away from travel a little bit, talk about your photography, because I'm obviously a huge fan. That's why I got in contact for you to come on the podcast. And something in particular, I'm a really big fan of yours, and something that I really value myself when it comes to the way that I shoot, the way that I do it probably for a different reason, but the way that I find photographers is that you seem to have a fantastic ability to not only capture a scene, but to also look for details within it, and to find like accompanying pieces to the broad sort of, when you watch a movie, you have that landmark shot that shows you, where the scene's about to take place, and then we punch into the scene. Your photography seems to follow something similar, where you show the grand area, but then we also pick up on interesting little details. And I think something that you kind of mentioned earlier about how if I came to your hometown, I would view it in a totally different way, and I would be so excited by stuff that maybe you've gotten used to.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want the words that I'm going to use here to come across as rude, because I promise you I don't mean them to be backhanded. But something you're extraordinary at is photographing things that are relatively ordinary, but photographing them in a very artistic way and in a way that really well accompanies the other photos. When you're actually out shooting, are you shooting with the mindset of like, okay, so I'm going to capture the wide shot and then I'm going to look for little details, or is it just you go kind of where you subconsciously are taken by your own mind?
I think it's primarily subconscious, and because I don't, so I recently did that video shooting in stores, and I posted a few of those images on Reddit, and Reddit's a great place for constructive criticism, by the way, because people aren't afraid to just shoot you straight. And I got some comments that were like interesting concept, but these photos are meh at best. And, like I see nothing special with these images. And that's totally fine, because I wasn't going in there with the intention of, I'm going to make a time capsule piece out of this specific project. And, these are photos that I'm going to look back on 10, 15 years from now and see how much the stores have changed. And, I really want to emphasize how mundane, this human experience is in 2020 and all this. I wasn't going for a deeper level of, my images weren't meant to have any sort of, deeper level of meaning. It was just literally, I wonder if I can get my Pentax into some stores and shoot some visually pleasing and interesting images from a perspective that a lot of people don't see on a regular basis, And so I think a lot of it's just this subconscious interest in photographing things that I find either visually pleasing or interesting on some sort of level. But yeah, I don't think that when I shoot a scene, I don't think I intentionally always will, say, okay, I want to get this broad shot to give people the idea of where I am and what's generally happening. And then I'm going to shoot these specific details that kind of fit everything together in some sort of, larger scale puzzle or something like that. I think it's just, I'm right. And I think this is part of the maturing process as a photographer. But right now, I love shooting things that just stick out to me. And it's hard to pinpoint exactly always what about that photo sticks out to me in particular. Sometimes it's just the way a color pops out, or sometimes it's just like a building will just fit inside of my frame lines in a way that I think is really aesthetic and looks visually nice, and I'll go ahead and shoot that. So I think as I develop further as a photographer, I think I will have these kind of more intentional and meaningful ways of photographing things. But right now, I think it's really heavily driven by my subconscious. There are certain times I'll go out and shoot and I'll, have some sort of artistic idea behind it and kind of figure out a way to, make it have a deeper meaning. But right now I just really enjoy, and I think that's what draws me to landscape photography, because I just love filling the frame with something that I find beautiful. And I love hiking. I love being outside. So I think that also naturally draws me to landscape photography. I think the majority of my photography right now is just subconsciously I'll get drawn to something and I'm not really sure why. And the fun part is if people see the image and they extract some sort of meaning from it, then that's fantastic. I think that's one of the joys of photography is you don't always have to go into it, with, okay, this is supposed to represent this, and this is supposed to be a metaphor for this. Everybody can kind of extract what they want from an image. And it's fun to if you do have those intentional meanings behind your photos, to share those at some point after everybody's had an opportunity to look at the work for a while and extract their own meanings. And then you can say, okay, this is actually what I was kind of going for. And everyone can be, oh yeah, I can see that. But
well, isn't that the thing, right? That's the case with a lot of great artists, the ones that had the ability to give up the control of interpretation and to just create something that spoke to them. And if you want to think it means it's about war, and someone else wants to think it's about sex, and someone else wants to think it's about nothing, who cares? Because that's kind of the purpose of art, is for the person viewing it to do what they want with it, and you can't control that. And I think we're in a bit of an epidemic at the moment, especially, the obvious examples would be people that add the really deep, meaningful captions to their Instagram photos that really definitely have no fucking effect at all on people, outside of just making some people roll their eyes. Where you should, there's nothing wrong at all with creating a piece of art that is intended to be a nice aesthetic. And it doesn't have to have, especially like this day and age, there seems to be a lot of politicization of things, or a lot of societal, we live in a society kind of nonsense where people want to make something into a statement where it just isn't. And they're almost shoehorning a meaning after the fact onto an image, rather than take an image, you take it for the reasons that you want to take it, and let people interpret it and give up that control.
Yeah. And I think, I've been guilty of doing that plenty of times, especially kind of when I was, 3-4 years ago when I was a bit younger and a bit more immature. I'd post these stupid pictures on my Instagram and have some sort of deep, inspiring caption behind it. That's just complete bullshit. But, I've had time to mature and reflect on that. And I think that is a big part of how I've kind of developed into somebody that can look at things with a bit more of an open mind, and, kind of realize when I'm not being true to myself and I'm kind of putting on this facade. And, I did a video a few weeks back where I went out and shot nighttime photos, and going into the night, I didn't have any intention of kind of creating this, I talked about the photos in the video, and I kind of mentioned that it gave me like ET vibes, young, reckless teenagers out one night, sci-fi, Stranger Things, like this kind of general mood of the images is kind of what I extracted after the fact. But I didn't go into that night with that intention of, okay, I'm going to make sure that all my images have the moon in the sky, and the colors are going to kind of give off this science fiction film vibe. And, it's going to, the vantage point that I shoot the pictures at is going to give the perspective of some young teenagers that are like spying on this government, project that's going on. This is all stuff that I kind of extracted afterwards, but I kind of went really in depth with the description of the photos. And a lot of people commented and said, dude, the way you talk about your photos really creeps me out, man. And and I had to, I'm always one to hear feedback. I want the feedback from people, because I don't want to just do my own thing and have everybody, hate it and offer me feedback and then I just ignore it. I think there's a good balance between doing what you want to do and staying true to yourself, but also listening to what people have to say about your photos so that you can better improve as a photographer and as a human. So I kind of listened to these responses, and at first I was like, oh, what do oh, screw off, man. Like, I'm doing what I want, but now I've like taken the time to process it, and was like, yeah, maybe I did get a little bit far-fetched with some of these meanings, and I was just trying to kind of create this deeper level of photography, or make my photography seem more intentional than it actually was. Because truth be told, I was just going out to make interesting photos that night. And then afterwards, I kind of saw the general theme of the photos, and I tried to interpret that and put that into my own words. But I think maybe I did get a little bit far-fetched. So I'm still trying to figure out, is that something that is okay to do? Can you just go out and shoot photos with no real intention, and then after the fact try to put together, was there some subconscious idea that I had in my head that I didn't even realize at the time, but afterwards it kind of all pieced together and formed this, general overarching storyline. I really don't know if that's frowned upon or if that's something. A lot of people liked the description and the kind of the way that I talked about the photos, but there were a lot of people that didn't as well. So maybe, I don't know if you have an opinion on that, but I'd be interested to hear your side.
You know what's funny is I remember I put up a set of portraits a while back, and it was 3 images of the same model. And in each image, there was a pretty I'm not sure if I can even put this in an Americanism, but it was a pretty stern look, a pretty stoic look on the model's face. And there are, how do I say this without offending 60% of the population? There are older men that constantly think that a woman that's not smiling, there must be something wrong, and that a woman's job is to smile almost. It's kind of a really weird middle ground. I can't really quite figure out what was going on culturally that led these people to be so fucking concerned with the expression on someone else's face. But there's inevitably a comment or two that comes up whenever I post something that isn't a happy portrait, I guess. And one of the comments that I had that was what made you settle on this expression? And my response was just, well, her smile was a bit fucking goofy in the pictures that we did that were more lighthearted. So I wanted to go for something that wasn't so fucking goofy. It wasn't like we had this big, deep, meaningful conversation about how we were going to try and impact your life.
Yeah.
It's just literally, we worked through what wasn't working to what was working. And aesthetically, I like how this looked. And honestly, if you're looking further into it, you're probably putting more work into my photography than I have.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you said about just this wasn't working, so let's try something different that will work. Because when you define working, it's something that I think only photographers and relatively mature photographers can understand. Sometimes just something as simple as a facial expression can make a photo work or not work. It doesn't matter how you compose the image, how you frame the subject, what she's wearing, or anything like that. It can boil down to something as simple as a facial expression, making a photo or not making a photo. And I love thinking about those things because I'll shoot a landscape and I'll notice a log in the bottom portion of my frame. And I'll be like, wow, if that log wasn't situated there the way that it is, I don't think this photo would have worked. And I don't think I would have been drawn to it.
That's chaos theory, right? That's the best part of photography, is the chaos theory, when there's an element that you probably couldn't recreate in the same way on purpose and get the same feeling, the same internal feeling of satisfaction as a photographer. And I think, obviously, because I primarily photograph people, a lot of that is in expression. And a lot of the way that I work on expression is basically to see what buttons you can push with a person. I try and find out generally what annoys them and what they enjoy. And then you can kind of play those two things off each other. And you have essentially one puppet string on either end of someone's emotions, and you can kind of push and pull to see what you can get, but you can never guarantee where that ends up. And that's the awesome thing with photography, is just trying to find that balance in the chaos. You're never going to end up with what you wanted. You're going to end up with something, and you might love it, you might hate it, but there's no definitive plan. And I think it's something as well with you mentioned earlier about not wanting to just have the pretty landscape. There needs to be something else to it. I think that's what's missing for a lot of photographers and a lot of creative people in general, is that they focus so much on putting together all the right pieces so that, well, it worked for someone else, therefore it will work for me. So with photographing models, it would just be attractive model, good styling, decent light. And then it's okay, but I need to feel something. That's a human being in front of the camera. And I still need to, I have to like them in some way for me to, or not like them profusely, for this to be an interesting sort of image that speaks to me, as opposed to just, yep, that's a person. Yep, they look fine. The light is not a problem. That's all good. We're fine. You want to avoid fine as much as you can with photography.
Right. Yeah. And I think that translates across all types of photography, whether it be portraits or landscapes or anything else. One of the fun things when I first got into film photography, I was doing quite a bit of portrait stuff. And that is one of the things that I find most fascinating about shooting portraits is you have an element of control over your image that you just don't when you're shooting any other type of photography. Landscapes, you just kind of come across things as they are and you can't change them other than waiting a specific amount of time for the lighting to change, or, waiting an even longer amount of time for a different season to come rolling around so you get different colors. But with shooting portraits, you have immediate control over many elements of the image, and you can kind of convey like you said, a more stoic look, something that's a bit more dramatic or something that's a bit more goofy and fun. And you can do that on demand. And I think it takes an incredible amount of skill to be able to, first of all, direct the model in that way and say, this is what I'm going for. And then it also takes a certain amount of skill on the model's end to, understand what it is that you're going for and be able to bring that vision to life. It's the same way, same thing in acting. The director has a certain concept in his head, and it takes a certain skill, as an actor, not just to convey the fact that, we're acting, but to really dive into the layered context of what the director has in mind. So it's the same way with photography. And I think I have utmost respect for the well-renowned and skilled portrait photographers, because I don't think people fully appreciate just exactly what it takes to make a comfortable looking image. I think at least when I first started taking portraits, I'd kind of have no idea what I was doing. And I just, okay, try this. And I just kind of focus on making a compositionally good looking image, as opposed to, hey, try this facial expression. Hey, put your arm here, let's change your outfit. There's all these elements that go into play that can really make or break a photo, a portrait photo. And I think that's potentially what even kind of drew me away from it. For now, at least, is it was a daunting kind of task for me to face. And I think I'm not always the best with expressing, like, I feel like I have coherent ideas in my head a lot. And many of the times I'm not the best at conveying those ideas that I have. And that can be frustrating for models. And when you're kind of working in a bit of a time crunch from scenario to scenario, when you're trying to say what you want, but you can't really put it into words. And then I found that happening to me from time to time. And I think that's what maybe even drew me to just shoot landscapes by myself. I can work at my own pace and just work in my own mind and just be out in nature and reflect by myself. But yeah, I think, shooting portraits is such an interesting thing, because people really, I don't think, understand how layered it is and how complex you can make it.
I think the biggest problem actually with portraiture in general, especially for people coming into it, is that a lot of people try and imitate someone else's directorial style or the way that they work on set. Absolutely. So especially in the age of YouTube being so prominent, you can literally see thousands upon thousands of people all approach it from a different angle. And really, it's potluck on how you first find portrait photography and how you see it done. And then like a lot of things with human beings, we see something done once and we decide that was the right way to do it. And anyone that goes against that is obviously like completely off kilter, but they're not. They're just, everyone approaches it differently. I've had a problem in the past where, so my personal style is that I completely refrain from the overindulgent like 1980s style compliments, because it just doesn't suit me and it would sound sarcastic in my tone of voice. So I'm not constantly like reinforcing people. When I say something's working, it has way more weight because I don't say it constantly. I'm not constantly like, trying to make it into this like, oh my God, you're just this godsend of a human being. When I actually pay a compliment, it really has more weight to it. But something else I do quite a bit is I want to see what wakes you up, because quite a lot of models in front of a camera are used to being in front of a camera, are quite bored in front of a camera. They're usually thinking about what they're going to have for dinner, what they're doing after the shoot, what works on next week or whatever. They're not actually in the moment, because it's like anybody when they're just at their day job. So I like to find a way to wake people up and maybe say stuff that's not the most complimentary. I'm not saying I'd be rude. Maybe I would be. I'm not sure. But just to kind of push buttons and see what reactions you get. And I've had one person in particular exactly challenge them. And I had one person on a workshop try and imitate the way that I do things, but he has a completely different tone of personality. Mm-hmm. So it came across really janky, and it came across like he was just outright insulting the model. And whilst it was obviously terrible, it was also one of the funniest things I've ever seen on a photo shoot. It's just the awkward silence that followed the insult was so perfect. It was almost like it was out of a TV show. Let me quickly jump back to film here, because I've got probably one of, if not now, very soon to be one of the most prominent people on YouTube when it comes to film shooting. And I don't want to waste the opportunity to not ask you a few questions.
I appreciate
one that's come up a lot on the podcast is film shooters' aversion to sort of modern design, and not in the sense of the camera or anything that you're using, but in the sense of what you photograph. It's not often you see film photography that actually photographs 21st century design. Quite often it's about photographing old buildings, old cars, dilapidation, abandoned places, and so on. Are you someone that has, like, if you're out shooting and there's a modern car in the scene, would you go out of your way to avoid it because it doesn't fit the medium of film?
Oh, that is a very interesting one. At first, I definitely was kind of engaged in that nostalgic ambiance that comes with shooting film. I was shooting a lot of old cars and specifically going out to find these kind of vintage looking scenes. And now I think not necessarily because I won't, like you mentioned, if there's a modern car in my frame, I think I would avoid it from just a photographical perspective, like a photographical standpoint, as opposed to, I'm shooting film, so this modern part of the image can't be in my frame. There's, I think it's just, this scene would work better with something a bit more vintage or a bit more classical. And I don't think that would vary if I was shooting on digital or film. I think even if I was shooting on digital and, there was some sort of modern car or building in my frame, I think I would still, if I could, try to avoid that, just to bring the image to a point where I'm pleased with and where I want it to be. So I don't think shooting specifically on film has anything to do with, me trying to always portray this vintage and nostalgic vibe with my photos. But I think it's just more from a general just general photography standpoint. Can this overall image...
Is it a case then that you think that just like modern design is just not particularly attractive, right? It's very utilitarian, it's very boxy, it's very boring and safe. Is that more the problem than film as the medium?
Yeah, it's something that we see. It's just like when I mentioned shooting in my hometown, modern design, modernism is what we see every day. It's normalized. When you see an old car, it strikes you because it's something different and something unique and something that you don't see every day. So I think that's what not only draws me, but all of these film photographers. I think it's what draws them to shoot these kind of old subjects. Is, I think film photography there's these kind of memes and stuff that have formulated about the gas stations and the nostalgia and stuff. And to a certain extent, it's true. But I also think that a lot of these photographers that are shooting on film are just drawn to these old classical cars, buildings, design, because it's something different. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people shooting film. Well, not unfortunately, but it's, there's so many people shooting film that unfortunately everybody has such easy access to share the photos. So everything can become oversaturated so quickly, which, part of that's good, that there is so many mediums to share your work and there's so many outlets to get your work out there. And film cameras are, relatively affordable. So a lot of people can pick them up. That's all great. But it's really hard to create an image that completely has not been done before. And, before the age of social media, there wasn't a way to easily share photos like there is now. And so I think a lot of people were creating more original and unique work, But it's really hard not to, like, I even find it difficult when I go out and shoot to not have some sort of subconscious influence by some other photograph that I've seen or some photographer that I follow. It's like built into my brain because I consume it so much. That's what I do. I make YouTube videos, so I'm involved in the community and I see a lot of work on a daily basis. And I think it kind of tattoos itself into my brain. And I think I draw a lot of inspiration subconsciously from other people. So yeah, I mean, to answer your question, I think it doesn't vary whether I'm shooting digital or film or still photography or video. I just think I see modern architecture, modern design, cars, all this stuff on a regular basis. So to find something old and unique and something that I don't see every day, that's what draws me in to shoot the photo, not necessarily because I'm shooting on film.
So because the whole world is currently obviously ending in about 15 different ways and everyone's in a constant state of anxiety and panic, I figured a good way to sort of push towards the ending of this is to just add one more element of how the world is ending. And the way that I want to do that is basically ask you it's a bit of a loaded question, but I'm quite interested to see your take on this. Obviously, film is becoming more popular. You've said yourself, there's so many people shooting film. It's becoming more and more of a popular medium exponentially week on week, especially with lockdown. I think a lot of people have found film photography as a way to get through things. I found your YouTube channel during lockdown. It's been a big part of me starting to shoot film. I think a lot of people have just used this time to maybe focus on a new medium, and it's obviously popular in general anyway. A lot of digital photography is chasing after film look. You never see film photography chasing after a digital look, right? So that's sort of that's the way the tide flows. Are we reaching a critical point where the popularity of film is diminishing the used market of cameras, and that pretty soon, where obviously a few years ago people thought that film would die because there wouldn't be any film available, we might actually reach a point where there aren't enough film cameras available to meet the market, and especially with no other companies really en masse producing new film cameras.
This is such an interesting one because I had this realization a couple of weeks ago. I was like, my Pentax, I like dented the shutter dial a little bit, so I like can't lift it up and change my ISO as well now. And I was thinking, well, there's going to be a point where I just can't get a new Pentax, or I just can't get somebody to repair this because they aren't making new cameras anymore, and there's a limited amount of these cameras available. Certain cameras I think will forever, the Canon AE1s and the Pentax K1000s and stuff. I think these were such mass produced for a consumer audience that I think there's always going to be people wanting one and people, wanting to sell one. But these more professional grade, the cameras, the people that really are taking it seriously and buying these higher end cameras, these Pentax 6.7s and the Fuji GX690s and stuff like that. I think there's going to be a point where nobody can repair them and nobody's making new ones, that we're just going to run out of them entirely. And I don't know what the time frame is on that, but I definitely had that realization as well a couple of weeks ago. Some of these more these rarer film cameras, I mean, they're gonna eventually go extinct just because people that want them are gonna buy them, and then from use and whatnot, they're gonna break, and it's just gonna diminish. But I think in general, there will always, for the very foreseeable future, there's always, if you want to shoot film, there's going to be a camera that allows you to do that. But not necessarily for the specific type of film that you want to shoot. If you want to shoot 6:9 medium format, I don't know if there's always going to be a camera available for you, or 6:17. If there's always going to be a medium format camera available for you to do that. But, I think like 35 mil and some of the more basic Canons and Nikon F3s and whatnot, there's a lot of those around. So I think it'll last a while, but it's an interesting concept for sure, to think that, wow, film cameras actually might go extinct at some point.
It's a good idea for like an end of the world type movie, a short film on YouTube to scare the shit out of some hipsters for sure. I mean, literally, like, was it yesterday or day before, Grainy Days? So Jason was on the podcast back about 20 episodes ago, and he posted a video about a film stock that he's using as like a Rolly Variochrome alternative. Mm-hmm. My instant reaction as soon as the video started was like, well, fuck, that's going to be out of stock for the next 6 months, because now he's done a video on it, so everyone's going to be buying it.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I've thought about, should I be buying an extra Pentax 6.7 body? Because it's a really good medium format camera for me, and I can see myself using that for forever as my main go-to camera. So I'm thinking, should I be picking up another Pentax 6.7 or a couple more bodies just in case, mine breaks and at some point down the road I can't find another one? It's it's so interesting, but I don't know. We'll see.
Now we just scared the shit out of everybody. I think is a good time probably to wind things up. Obviously, massive thank you again for taking the time to do this. And
I appreciate it.
A massive thank you as well. In the midst of a really horrible year with lockdown and everything, your YouTube channel has been something that I've really enjoyed. Your channel has been so amazing to watch, and especially because you're quite often photographing parts of America that I'm fascinated by. So it's a big deal for me. We need to make sure everyone knows where they can go to see your work. So your Instagram and especially your YouTube, so they can go and enjoy what I've been enjoying.
Sounds good. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you having me on the podcast, and my Instagram, I just switched it over. So it's my full name now, Brae Hunziker, and my YouTube is the same deal. My full name, Brae Hunziker. So if you search me up on both those platforms, it should pop right up. But yeah.
Thank you so much for taking the time.
Well, thank you for having me. This was a great conversation. A lot of interesting topics to discuss. You kind of got my brain firing right now. Now I'm worried things are going to go extinct and I can't shoot film anymore.